It was late November 2018 when me and two of my friends decided to go walking in the woods around my house. My father had recently bought 6,000 acres of woodland, deep in the countryside, just outside of Hampshire. It was a rather spacious area, but I had no idea the secrets the woods held. Me and two friends, whose names I've changed for privacy, walked into the woods, deciding to take torches with us, although it was only 5 p.m., but the trees were barely a few feet apart. We had to turn the torches on after walking about a mile into the woods. As we walked, we began to notice that the ground was getting rockier, the rocks slowly turning into a broken-down wall. Then I noticed something, old rusted iron, embedded into the ground. Shining the torch around, I noticed how high the wall had gotten. If I had to guess, I'd say about 15 feet high. That's when one of my friends, Mark, said, "Guys, I think we found an old castle or something." Another friend, Amy, piped up and said, "Mark, don't be dumb. There are loads of ruins like this dotted around Hampshire." Their conversation faded as I wandered in, through what must have been a gatehouse. The wooden ceiling rotted away with moss and mushrooms holding the walls up. "Danny," Mark shouted, "where'd you go?" Poked my head around the moldy door frame and shouted, "In here." And Amy, "I think he's right." All three of us wandered through the small gateway and shone our torches around. About 30 feet away from what we thought to be the courtyard was a border wall, just shorter than the gatehouse, made from what looked to be the same stones and woodworm-eaten, moldy wood were some buildings, or rather, the remnants of buildings. We wandered around for about half an hour before I found an odd-looking, old iron trapdoor set in the old stone floor of one of the more complete buildings. I shouted out to Mark and Amy, "Guys, I think I'm onto something here." They both came running. "Well, would you look at that?" Amy exclaimed. "Should we open it?" asked Mark. "Well, duh," said Amy, all while I was investigating the trapdoor. "Well, come on then," Mark said, becoming agitated, nudging me with his foot. "Open it," he exclaimed. "Jesus, Mark." "Okay, just let me." I hit the trapdoor where it was locked on the inside with the butt of my torch. Hearing something click, Mark pushed me out of the way and began pulling on the handle. "Jesus, Mark, calm down," Amy said, watching him become more and more frantic with each pull. Amy put a hand on his shoulder and pulled him away softly. "Here," she said. "Let me help." Amy began to pull on the door, me standing to the side thinking. "Wait," I said. "Why would it be locked from the inside?" Mark interrupted me. "Danny, stop overthinking things." I walked slowly towards the two and Amy said, "Got it." As the door swung slowly open, a wafting smell of dank and musty air hit us in the face. Mark said. "That smells horrible." As Amy peered over the edge, she said, "Stop complaining, Mark. It's no worse than your bedroom." As Mark reacted to that comment, Amy was lowering herself down, legs first. "Hey Amy, is it even safe down there?" I queried. "From what I can see, yes," she responded. I peered over the edge, shining my torch into the blackness below. I helped Amy down. The clack of Amy's shoes echoed through what appeared to be a large tunnel. As I lowered her torch down to her, Mark looked around the woods, an eerie look across his face. "Everything okay?" Mark asked. "Yeah," he said, looking down at his watch. "Hey Danny," he asked. "Yeah." Sorta yelled back, "What time does your watch read?" I looked down at my watch and gasped, 9:03. Didn't we leave at 5 p.m.? Amy looked up wide-eyed. "My phone says 9:32. Weird," I replied before starting to lower myself down the hole. "Mark, you coming?" Yell up to him. "Yeah," he shouts back down. Once all of us were down in the tunnel, I shone my torch around and looked at the moth-eaten banners on the walls. "Jesus, some of this stuff looks like it dates back to the Crusades," Amy exclaimed. Walking further into the darkness, the air got hotter and stuffier. It seemed like we were going deeper into the earth. Gradually, the stone-walled tunnel began to get rougher and rougher until it was rough rock, lit only by our torches. We walked further into the tunnel before it opened into a cavern with a pillar of rock holding up the ceiling. "Wow," Amy exclaimed, "it sure is." Mark paused something, although it felt humid enough for moss to coat the walls of the cavern. It was surprisingly bare-walled. "Guys, get a load of this," Mark shouted as he pointed his torch into a foot-wide hole. As we all crowded around the hole, Mark's torch hit something in the hole, reflecting light back at us for a second. "What the hell?" I shouted. "Yeah, I saw something weird too," Amy looked at me quizzically. "Didn't see anything," Mark said. "No, Mark, get away from there." There was a clicking sound, slowly getting louder. "Mark, you bloody idiot. Listen to Denny." Amy shouted. There was a louder click and then a crack that echoed around the cavern. "Mark, what was that?" Staring at Mark, I slowly came to the realization that his neck had snapped. My suspicions were confirmed when Mark's body slumped to the ground, his neck twisting at an unnatural angle as his body hit the ground. "Oh shit," I shouted at Amy. "Behind the pillar, quick." As Amy and I ran behind the pillar, something unfurled itself from the hole. It was something horrifying, towering over me, and Amy. It was pale white and skeletal, standing at about 8 foot tall, its arms abnormally long, nearly reaching down to its knees and ending in hands with fingers longer than my forearms, nails sharpening to points. Looking at the thing's stomach, it had arrows stuck into its upper chest and a sword embedded in its abdomen. The handle looked mangled, as if the thing had tried to pull it out itself. The thing's head was nearly faceless, slits for the eyes with the whites being nearly a putrid yellow, bloodshot with wide black pupils. The nose was just 2 holes like the one the thing crawled out of, going back into its head. The mouth. I couldn't see it at first, but when it looked at Mark's body, it smiled, revealing sets of sharp, jagged yellow teeth, the mouth stretching so far that it looked like its head should have split in half. We looked on in horror as it grabbed Mark by the ankle, pulling him away, dragging him along the floor, his jacket pulling up and ripping around his head. After the thing had stalked its way down another passageway, me and Amy exchanged looks of fear. She began to run back to the stone-walled section of the passage. I pulled her back and held her for a minute, just beginning to forget where we were before I heard a noise that will stick with me for as long as I walk this earth. It was a mix between the mating call of a fox and a woman screaming in agony. This made me and Amy jump up and nearly out of our skin. The only things we could see were the shadows of one, no two, of those godforsaken creatures projected onto the wall by Mark's fallen torch. Amy and I looked on in horror as one of the creatures screeched at the other. Then it turned towards us. A screech later, and me and Amy were running back down the way we came. We were nearly there when Amy screamed. She had fallen. I looked back and stopped, only to see a creature pounce on Amy and bite a chunk out of her shoulder. I ran again, only to crash into something. Staring back at me was the pale, white, sunken chest of one of those things. I was stuck, sank to the floor in defeat. The creature looked at me, as if understanding. That's when I felt it. The kind of hunger that you can't get rid of by eating. But I ate the only thing left in sight, Amy. I wish I could do more, but the supple flesh drew me in further and further. Take it as a warning. Use me as a cautionary tale. If I could speak to you, I would. But all I can do is screech and scrape away in the dark. A faceless husk. My warning to you. If you ever find the ruins of a castle deep in the English woods, run. I went camping deep in the forests of Oregon, and I haven't been the same since. At times, I regret going into that forest. At times, I'm amazed. My story starts a few years ago, in September of 2007. I drove out into a distant forest in my home state of Oregon. I had been camping out there for a day or two when I decided to go deeper into the woods. I'd been walking for about an hour when I decided I'd walked far enough. I looked up at the bright blue sky. I closed my eyes, taking in the sweet scent of the pine trees. As I was setting up my small tent, the forest, typically filled with the soft chirps of birds and bugs, went silent. I knew from experience that meant a predator was nearby. Maybe there was a cougar, or perhaps a bear. Setting my tools down on the ground, I looked around. There didn't seem to be anything there, so I continued to put up my tent. The sun had almost set by the time I finished. The woods weren't quiet anymore. Whatever had been there was gone now. In the distance, I could hear water. I grabbed my fishing rod and followed the sound, and I found a small river, barely 7 feet wide. I sat there for a few hours, fishing in wonderful silence. As I was walking back to my campsite in the dark, preparing to cook myself dinner, I froze. Everything had gone silent again, and I could hear something moving quickly through the brush. I couldn't see anything though, because I hadn't made a fire yet. Had only a weak, dim little flashlight to light my way. The forest still quiet. Put most of my fish into my cooler, and started a small fire to cook the rest. The only noise to drown out the deafening silence was the crackling of the fire and the sizzling of the fish as it cooked. Snap! A mere few yards from me, I could hear footsteps. They didn't seem human, but they didn't seem like an animal either. Whatever it was just outside the ring of firelight. Slowly, a tall creature, with arms that reached down to its legs, hobbled into view. It had pinkish skin, and its eyes were blacker than tar. It was very thin, and looked like it was starving. It crept closer to me. Feeling of dread had washed over me. I couldn't move. It opened its mouth wider than I thought physically possible. I was terrified. My shirt and face were drenched in cold sweat. The thing came closer and closer, extending one of its arms toward me, probably ready to grab me, take it to its lair, and do God knows what with me. I wanted to grab my hunting knife, but I still couldn't move. Suddenly, an unholy screech rang out through the night, and something about the demeanor of the creature had changed. It started smiling, almost as if it were telling me, "You got lucky," then shuffled away, back into the darkness. Found I was able to move again, and scrambled to gather my things. I didn't care about whatever else was lurking out there. Just wanted to get away. I frantically dug through my bag, then let out an exasperated sigh. My compass was gone. I wouldn't be able to find my way back to my truck without it. I would have to wait until morning to leave. It's been years since that day. When I didn't return as scheduled, I was reported missing by my sister. I was found wandering a highway, disheveled and despondent. My sister was the first person I told about my encounter, and to this day only her and a select few people believe my story. The thought of going back to that forest still scares me, and I never enter the woods without a firearm. I don't know why the creature left that night. I don't know what would have happened if it didn't. All I know is that the forest is dangerous. There are things in there that humans could never comprehend. I was 12 then, and the nightmares I've had since this incident seems too horrific for me to forget. It was about 11:30 at night, and me and a few friends who we'll name Tim and Joe for now, were playing in the woods at the edge of Tim's backyard. This was my first sleepover, so I was mainly just following what Tim and Joe were doing. We stumbled upon a large rock sticking up out of the ground that looked like the shape of a mountain. This rock had to be about 20 feet high, and was intriguing to look at. I seemed to be drawn to the size, and my friends seemed to have the same idea as me. I looked over at Tim and Joe and said, "That looks like fun to climb, don't you think?" They looked at me with a smile, and Joe started his climb to the top with Tim and me following shortly after. Now, I've heard people say that having the feeling of someone watching us is a sixth sense, and others saying that 80% of the time you feel like someone is watching you, there really is. I don't know which is true or if any of them are, But on that night, at the time I made it to the top of the rock, I had a weird vibe suddenly hit me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up like a scared cartoon cats would have. Looked into the woods with the trees covering any moonlight, trying to bleed through the branches and leaves. A tall, wide, and slumped pine tree with a very strange stump at the bottom caught my eye. It looked almost like the outline of a human, but only half, as the rest was covered by the tree. Ignored this idea of it being someone as if nothing happened, and had forgotten about the whole thought. About 30 minutes later, we had ventured deep into the woods with nothing but glow sticks left over from past 4th of July parties to guide our way. I remember the exact moment in which my whole world turned upside down. We were just passing by a small, deep hole that looked to be made by groundhogs. We looked down inside to see if anything was living in there, when I heard the most horrific scream, and to this day will never forget the look and emotion on Tim's face as he was dragged away by his arms into the dark woods. It took a minute for Joe and me to comprehend what just happened before we chased after Tim. It didn't take long before we stumbled upon a small shack in the woods that looked to be abandoned. We looked in the other direction and wondered if they ran off another way. Just as we decided to keep running, we heard that same scream from earlier. It was short and seemed to be muffled by something covering it. We quickly ran in the building to see Tim struggling with a large man, wearing a hoodie and some sort of cloth covering his face, trying to stop Tim from resisting. Scanned the room in hope of finding anything sharp or large. Settled with a rusty fork laying on the floor in front of me, I quickly ran up to the man and dug the screwdriver in his back. He screamed in agony and quickly released Tim before dropping to the floor. We grabbed Tim and sprinted to his house, nearly out of breath, and told his parents, who called 911 right away. We scanned the windows hoping to see anything or anyone, but it was just too dark. Turned on the backyard light in hope to see anything or anyone, and almost instantly noticed the outline of a figure staring at the house, and not even 10 seconds later they bolted off into the dark woods. 15 minutes later, the cops arrived and did a full investigation and found the shack that the man had been in, but turned up with no clues as to who he was or where he went. I sometimes hope that I saw that person just one more time, but that was it. The last time we've seen or heard of that man again. If you enjoyed these stories, you can leave a like to help me out. Thanks for tuning in today, and see you soon.